Okay, here we go. So, Comrade DaStoned Soviet, how goes it?
It's going all right. It's great to be speaking with you, comrade. Nice to bring out the to the people a little more about yourself, because you're an important figure to what we're trying to build here, but a lot of people don't fully understand what it is you're about.
Well, you know, what I went through to be me, you know, like is pretty sort of original, you know, because I'm just, you know, from a family, refugee Jewish family, you know, from Poland, whose families, you know, never had any university education. I ended up, you know, doing my PhD in political science at the University de Quebec and Montreal because of the necessity of doing so, because I've been an activist, you know, since forever, sort of thing. Since my mother was an activist, you know, in Poland, in Warsaw, and escaped from the Warsaw Ghetto, and her mother was a partisan as well. Her brother, yeah, of my mother, you know, so it's a sort of a pretty solid background, you know, to be thinking in activist terms, you know.
The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was probably one of the most beautiful show of how strong Polish struggle against fascism and Jewish struggle against fascism had stuck out until, you know, all the way through the war, deep into the war, it stuck out. Warsaw would not fall, no matter how much the Allies left it behind.
Yeah, but the point I was making is that, you know, I was an activist, you know, before I was an academic, you know, and became an academic in order to be an activist, because I realized, you know, that there was a cliff there, you know, that we didn't know, you know, what went beyond, you know, we had to figure it out, you know, for ourselves and build it at the same time. So, you know, that's why I went into, you know, political theory, international relations, constitutional law, political philosophy, and all that, you know, to build up the alternative, you know, to a nation state. And I applied it to Palestine in terms of the Hebrew nation that is settled there, which can be accommodated by the Palestinians. And so and when I was writing in Nablus, you know, I wrote a book as well, you know, because activism and, you know, writing, you know, to me, you know, go together. Because, you know, I'm talking with people all the time, you know, that I'm working with, and they tell me, you know, what they want. And so, you know, I figure out how to reconcile that, you know, with a Jewish national liberation without being Zionist type of thing. So that's, you know, why I developed the application of the national cultural autonomy from the Bund to the Hebrew nation that exists there right now, that are called, you know, the Israelis, the Jewish Israelis. And so they become, you know, autonomous in a federation with the Palestinians, and they share the territory in that way. And then all land disputes have to be regulated by a trilateral commission, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have constitutional assemblies, you know, to develop a federal council. You know, it's all possible. You know, it's logical, it's possible, and there's historical precedents, you know. So that's how I apply, you know, and become an activist and an academic, you know, at the same time. It's really necessary. I would encourage other people to go to studies.
I guess it looks at a very much important tie as well between religiosity and culture. And do you know, it was that important tie that your discussion on cultural autonomy made me come to the realization that I feel like local cultural authority, which I guess the constitutional assemblies is really what you're getting into there anyway. Local cultural authority within a national cultural autonomy is massively important, so that power is displaced amongst the people, essentially.
Yeah, it's like a Lego thing, you know, like a federation of federations, and develops, you know, like a to any degree necessary. And then the coordination is done by delegates, you know, recallable, you know, who honor speak, you know, for the consensus of opinion from who they represent, you know, on a rotating basis, et cetera, et cetera. It's always possible, yeah. You know, like one time, you know, I ran into what is that guy, you know, the Christian liberation guy, you know, in the United States, who gets a lot of, you know, media, Chris Hedges.
Oh yeah, Chris Hedges.
So I was at an academic congress, you know, in Canada one time, and he was the lead speaker at like 7:30 in the morning or something. So I went actually, and then, you know, it was filled with people, you know, like 300 people in this hall, you know, to hear this guy.
But
you know?
Like,
okay,
I got respect for that. Turn it up at 7:30 in the morning. Fuck it up.
Yeah. So, you know, I got to ask a question, and I said, you know, like, what was his opinion about direct democracy? he said, oh, it doesn't work, like it's been shown that it doesn't work for more than 500 people, like in any given meeting. And I said, well, like 500 people, that's a lot, like, and I sort of screeched practically in a very sort of, stressed tone, I said, like, what about, like Prudhomme's, Federation of Federations? And then he had no answer because he probably didn't even know who Prudhomme was. And all the academics, were silent, like, bit of attention, so I said, okay, like, I'll leave it at that, like, I'm not going to bother you anymore.
You're already dragging him through mud enough.
I am a troublemaker. I just, like, ask the necessary questions and not, the cliches. I'm so tired of cliche questions and stuff like that.
It was the idiocy of his answer. I feel that people have forgotten how much 500 people is. It's a lot of people. Just because a million people is more. I'd like to go to like the way that Islam looks. They say that one life is worth. I can't remember whether it's 1,000, a million, or it's a massive number. But essentially, one life is worth a very large chunk of life because our value of human life has become so individualistic that we just then count every individual life as a separate capacitative to life rather than looking at us as communal people that work together. Well, 500 people organizing society, well, that's a district of a town easily, like
that's
one
a whole neighborhood, Yeah, in Havana they have 20,000 revolutionary defense committees, I think they're called. 20,000 in Havana alone, So when I was visiting one time in Cuba, and the academics, were in a presentation from Cuba, probably from the Communist Party as well. And they said, you can ask us anything. Okay, so I said, well, you've got these 20,000, revolutionary defense committees, in Havana. How come they don't, form a Soviet, and be autonomous, from the state? And you build up, like this, throughout the whole country, with constitutional assembly and everything, with representation from all of these, like councils, municipal councils, et cetera, et cetera. And they said, oh, no. They started laughing, in unison. So, and they wouldn't even answer, they just dismissed the question entirely. So then after that, wow. I figured, like it was pretty useless.
It's there. I guess this comes into like cognitive dissonance and how people like to dodge the most difficult aspect of intellectual thought, which is criticism.
I don't know. Yeah, it's sort of a circle logic, everything justifies itself. There's no way out of the circle.
Exactly. So everything you have has like every good answer you have for someone that is a logical thing that we could definitely do. They always have some like sly, cocky answer that you'd expect from a child that is trying to get out of trying to do a chore or something. Like it's almost pathetic, but you can't deal with it like that because you'll never get anywhere with them. But it almost seems like you get nowhere with them anyway, so it's hard to hopscotch it.
Well, in political theory, that's called tautological. I mean, circular thinking, that it's an argument that's trying to rationalize itself.
Like the diagram.
Yeah. Oh, my. So I've gone to a lot of extremes, in my political activism as well, because I'm sort of, like so concerned, with trying to smash the remains, of fascism and turn it into a corpse that prevent its resurgence, that I've always, like been on the offensive, especially, like, for example, in grade 6, I had this primary school teacher at the King Edward Public School. Imagine, King Edward, one of these imperial, monarchs. And there he is, right there, and in our neighborhood. And so, this teacher, Mr. Gardner, is talking to the class about some scientific thing, or other, and he just sort of, interjects, out of the blue that the Jews killed Christian babies in the Middle Ages. So I freaked out on them and stood up, without permission, and pointed to him and yelled, basically, you're a liar. You're a liar, like emphasizing the you're.
I mean, half of these royals are German. I mean, English were doing horrible things to the Jews around this time as well. But I want to remind people where
German
the term, because idiotic American comedies has made people think it comes from Central Asia. This term, but it doesn't. It doesn't come from Kazakhstan. It comes from Germany. And the term "throw the Jew down the well" that comes from when they were chucking them down wells during the Black Death. If anyone has been doing anything to anyone, it was Protestants and Catholics murdering Jews, not the other fucking way around.
Oh,
So they can get out of here with their bullshit.
Oh yeah, the first crusade came from France.
Yep.
They wanted to become an empire, so they sent a whole bunch of soldiers down to occupy Jerusalem, and on the way, like occupy everywhere else, but on the pretext that they were going to Jerusalem, and also on the way, like murdering as many Jewish people as they could. So it was like the crusade started in Europe, didn't start like in the Middle East, and then it was Germany with the what do they call the Templars? The Templars was another crusade.
Well, there's actually a rise of a group called the Knights Templar in Britain that's trying to return fascism.
Oh yeah,
really directly. It's ran by an Ulster Scot who supports Northern Ireland.
Oh.
Jim Dyson.
Oh yeah, Northern Ireland. Oh, that was a big struggle. I went through a lot.
Yeah,
for that.
that is a like Northern Ireland was somewhat like almost like the pattern for what would soon become apartheid. It was the start of it.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing as well that I wanted to get into, so slavery, modern history tries to like, not in schools, I mean like the common consensus that comes from people just from a typical thought. They seem to think that slavery was started from a mistake of us not understanding black people. We've known about black people for fucking way longer than we were ever calling people white or black. We've been connected to Africa for millennia. I mean, there's pottery that's found in Britain from the 3rd and 4th century that comes from bloody Jerusalem. Do I need to say any more? Like, it's ridiculous. Like, these people seem to think this of Jewish people, of African people, that there's just this mistake that because they look different that we oppressed them. It's because we used whatever excuse we could to make them to be different to oppress them. It was all about class poisoning society, because every time, like if we look at the Abrahamic faith, for example, every time a new sector of the Abrahamic faith rose up, it always tried to rose up in a very tribal socialistic principle. And it was always corrupted by class. Class always come in and smashed whatever it was trying to do. Whatever animosity any Marxist or any other dickhead has for religion, I couldn't really care, because, I'm an agnostic Catholic myself. And as far as I'm concerned, I see that there is a cultural basis for tribal socialism and when I say tribal, I mean tribal as in the traditional sense of nation, not as in a sense of historical irrelevance. Because I hate the way that tribal is used in a disrespecting manner. It really drives me up the wall with the way that white middle-class people seem to think that tribalism is some backwards thing, when tribalism is the true sense of nation. It's nation without the nation state. And they're I lost my thought. I was on a really good point then. Yeah, tribal socialism within religiosity. These cultures developed to try and correct wrongs that they thought were occurring. I mean, Ethiopia was the start of Christianity. A lot of people don't know that, and they started Christianity when Christ was in sanctuary there, running from the Romans. Ethiopia also gave sanctuary to the Prophet Muhammad when he was in struggle, and I think Islam is actually a really good example, as much as Christianity is something we can talk hours for on it. So I mean, look at the rise of
Moses as well had sanctuary in Ethiopia. Did you know that?
Oh, I didn't know that actually. No way.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I remember listening to Kwame Ture talk about it. About the other guys, he didn't mention Moses. I wish he'd mentioned Moses. That'd have been fiery, because then he was talking about the relativity between the Abrahamic faith and the African people, and how all their struggles are tied to the African people, because the Zionists
there's an incident, which it denotes that, because when I was working with some Africans, setting up, a nonprofit kitchen at our cultural center. And you know, they were playing some music, you know, like in one song, you know, I was talking continually about, you know, like Adonai, Adonai, Adonai. And I said, you know, like, you know, like, that sounds like, you know, the Hebrew word that I learned, you know, for the name of God, one of the names of God. And I said, so, you know, what does the word mean in Wolof, you know, the language of Senegal? He said, oh, it means it's the word for life. So,
That's,
you know, like,
so beautiful,
isn't it? You know, so Hebrew adopted to the word for life in one of the African languages, you know, that they came across, you know, through the migrations, and used it to mean, you know, the name of the all-inclusive, you know, deity or something like that.
well, I mean, if you think about it, doesn't this really incorporate the balance between agnostic and what's it, non-agnostic
Yeah.
religious folk? Because it really entwines. Because and not as a non-agnostic person, I would see the representation of God as the representation of all things that exist, and I'm open to things being proved further, because if they exist, like this is why I hate about like vulgar materialists. If he's proven to exist, he's a material thing. You can't measure him. He's beyond our capacity, but he's still material. He exists.
Precisely.
He may
be.
be.
The argument of whether or not, you know, a deity exists, you know, is a moot question, you know, because you cannot prove it one way or the other. So you have to abandon the question in the first principle.
You have to still respect, though, that people have the love and belief for it as well, because people that don't respect that are scum.
Religion is a culture, you know, like that includes a lot of things, you know, and it operates by way of metaphors. You know, it's, you know, not literal, you know, it's metaphoric. For instance, you know, I can prove it as well, you know, because in Genesis, you know, when it talks about the creation of the universe, okay, that's similar to the Big Bang, you know, like, so it's a primordial astrological, you know, theory of the universe. And this is, you know, considered to be, you know, like the deity or the work of the deity, okay? So there's some sort of intuitive logic to it, you know, that you can sort of, you know, see. So it's talking about a beginning of a universe. And then it talks about the creation of light, you know, on the first day, even though, you know, there was no day that existed yet, because the earth had not yet existed, because the earth was created on the second day. So that proves that it's metaphorical. But
also a thing to point out as well is that days are not the same measurement that we would use at that point in time, because our rotation around the sun that we've decided to base our days off is not what God could be basing his days off. They could be fucking billions of years for all we know.
and it was not always the same thing either, you know, it evolved. So, you know, that demonstrates, you know, how the text is all metaphorical and is written by a human, not written by the deity. So
it's a thing as well.
So you know, like
history,
and also, you know, at the age of 14, you know, I couldn't accept, you know, the idea of, you know, being loyal to the deity, you know, because the deity wasn't loyal to us and abandoned us. You know, there's a joke that demonstrates this, you know, that comes from a resistance movie. Like, I'm going to tell it to you now. Okay, there's these two Jewish guys, you know, in heaven, sitting there talking to each other, and one guy, you know, like, he was from Treblinka, you know, death camp, and the other guy, he was from the Majdanek death camp. And the first guy, you know, like, says, you know, was arguing, you know, like, why his camp was so much worse than the one of the other guy, you know. And the other guy, you know, like, he in response, you know, was arguing, you know, like, how his camp was so much worse than, you know, like the previous guy's camp. So then, you know, like, God comes into, you know, like this, you know, and steps in and says, you know, like, gentlemen, you know, like, relax, you know, like, just rest in peace. And so then the first guy, you know, says, excuse me, but you weren't in either one or the other, so you don't have a voice in this matter, you know, leave us alone.
Fucking hell, that's savage, that is. I bet that ruffled a lot of feathers.
Insolent, very insolent, you know. I was famous for insolence in high school. I got suspended from my high school for that, as I was told.
I used to get suspended a lot from school because you know, a lot of the time it ends up being an outlet. Other times, you know, because of my very aggressive upbringing, I was very aggressive at dealing with a lot of issues too. So where's where my insolence come from?
Yeah. Oh well. Oh well. Yeah. So I wanted to add, you know, before, you know, when I went to Ottawa to work at the embassy, you know, to help stop the war, basically, you know, start, you know, writing things, you know, so that people in North America could understand what the Palestinians were talking about. And then, you know, the massacre took place in Sabra Shatila camps, and 3 months to write, the book, documentary, study proving, that the Israel military, was responsible for the massacre and helped organize it, and all that. And I give all the, proof, and then, at the same time, like I was sleeping at the peace camp, squatting on Parliament Hill in front of the Parliament building, in Ottawa, against the U.S. cruise missile, which the government, the Liberal Party government, was trying to conceal, with the secret military treaty with the United States, which was contrary to constitutional law in Canada, because any sort of, treaty with a foreign power has to be passed by the House of Commons. But no, they just kept it secret and they didn't bother. There was a big scandal, we exposed it and stepped right into it, and made them pay for it. And eventually, I think the tests were stopped. And because they wanted to use it, to have the capacity to go in freezing temperatures over the North Pole to be able to shoot a cruise missile into the northern Soviet Union at the time. That was 1982. 83 to 85, I lived at the peace camp there for 8 months myself. And eventually, went back and then got arrested, I did prison time. Yeah, we could do a whole story, video about, prison time.
That would be a great discussion, because that experience is something that a lot of people that have the title PhD have not had to go through.
No, the PhDs, they're allergic, to the prison time, because if you have a prison record, no university will hire you to teach, for one reason. And then
you over.
The boycott, of anti-Zionists, especially if you're a Jewish anti-Zionist, they don't want to have you around. Most political science departments are still liberal, rad lib, bullshit.
So, I mean, the thing that would be sort of said as well is, given the experience is probably is the driver of genuine knowledge, wouldn't it be safe to argue as well that going through that arduous prison time, just all it did was solidify you, because it gave you a punishing experience that made you feel that you were in the right for what you were doing, because you're being punished by the military police of Canada.
No, it's better than that, because when you're in prison, the way I felt is, not, how hard this is, and how terrible, and how miserable and how depressing. No, I didn't feel that way. I felt like, wow, they consider me such a threat as this, that they actually have to put me in prison, And that's, it was Conservative Party government, at the time, that put me in prison, during an election campaign, and so, I said, wow, I'm that, significant. Well, then let's use it, So when, they started doing the tests again in January 15th, usually was the time, I went on a hunger strike when I was in prison. And we had access to a telephone, because it was, a political right that was won, a few years previously, so prisoners could have access to a telephone. Previously, you couldn't.
Yeah, you were locked up and not able to speak with the outside world.
You were dead, dead to the. Okay, so I was able to get put together a list of all the media in the city. I would call up all the media, and I told them I was going on a hunger strike, against the beginning, beginning of the cruise missile tests. So they started broadcasting all across the country, that the cruise missile test was happening, and that there was this activist who was on a hunger strike. And this went on for, 1 week, and then it went on for, another week. And then finally, the administration of the prison, they were getting very upset with me. And they figured out, that I was using the salt in the meals to mix into the water so that I would be able to retain the water, when I was drinking water, but not eating. And if you don't have the salt, then you can't retain the water, because we're basically sea creatures who have learned to breathe air. So they took the salt away from me, so that I was dehydrating. And it was the wintertime, it was cold, and I only had a t-shirt, on. And they wouldn't even give me another t-shirt, So, and I was on the wall, where the wind was blowing against, so if I put my hand on the wall, my hand turned purple. And, it was getting tough. And the lawyer came to see me, and I told him the conditions, and he went to court, applied for a habeas corpus, and I got released. I walked out of the prison. That was tough. So I was dehydrating without salt for 5 days.
That was hardcore shit. I mean, 5 days without water is actually, you know, you've gone past what most people would take before they're even, you know, out of it. It's normally 3 to 5 days for water, you know, 7 days for food.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
That's
food.
hardcore.
Yeah, food was. You know, the thing that was tough about it was that it was in the wintertime. You know, like the First Nations people that I've spoken to, you know, and told about that particular fast. They told me that in the wintertime, you know, in the cold, you know, like a fast of that duration counts double.
Yeah.
Because of the heat that you lose.
Yeah, you burn so much energy in the winter time. You need to eat twice as much calories if it's as cold as it is in certain parts of Canada, you know, and you're up in the really
Yeah.
icy regions.
Well, but you know, like I developed this side feeling, you know, that I'm willing to even die. You know, like if that's what it means, you know, if you know they're willing to let me die, you know, like they won't.
Revolutionary suicide.
Yeah, you get that feeling, you know, especially in prison, you know, and it's a real feeling and it's a logical feeling too.
You
That's the
went,
trouble.
you had your George Jackson moment. That's what I would put it at. And you know, when he did his jailbreak, he tried to save those people from prison and got shot in the process.
Oh,
That's you know, like that risk of your life for a movement that's, you know, bigger than your own, plight as an individual.
yeah. So,
George
you know,
Jackson is the biggest symbol to that, and it's like I got love and respect, and I got love and respect for you for what you've done in that as well. Because anyone who goes through that struggle is a absolute legend.
yeah, it's a matter of what's intolerable. You know, like when I'm in Palestine in front of the soldiers, you know, they're trying to push back a demonstration or shoot back a demonstration. They don't push like here, you know, with shields. You know, they use a lot of tear gas and they use um, rubber bullets, you know, not even sticks. They don't bother with sticks. No way. They don't get that close. They use rubber
Yeah,
bullets and they shoot into vulnerable areas, you know, even though they shoot into your eye, you know, if they feel like it, if they're
rubber
ordered to.
bullets ain't no soft hitter anyway.
Oh,
Like there's a big problem with rubber bullets in the way that they're used.
I have one here. I brought it back from Palestine. This is what it looks like. Do you see this?
I cannot see. Your camera's not on.
Yes, it was on.
No, it is. There we go. Ah,
Oh, I
yeah,
needed to
no.
turn it on a second time.
No, it's like yeah, it did the glitch thing that Skype can do sometimes. But it's working now. That
Okay.
that looks like it absolutely bloody conk when it hits you. And
What time?
don't they even have sizes that are even bigger than that as well that they fire at people?
I haven't seen
Like,
those, but these are pretty heavy, you know. So I once shaved off all the rubber to see, you know, how big the metal was inside, and it's pretty big, you know,
it's
like occupies
very
3/4
big.
of the space.
You know, and to be honest, even if there was the recoil in space, you're being hit by rubber that has mass behind it, so it's going to have a slap effect when it hits you and then pops in.
Momentum,
So
yeah, yeah,
that can slash
very
you. That
high velocity, yeah. Oh yeah,
there was
I
a
hit.
woman
I
who
was
got
hit
hit
by.
in the arm. So during the protest, the guy who got his bicep shot out, one of the things he was doing before he did that is he was helping a woman who got shot in the arm, and her arm got lacerated because of the rubber bullet.
Wow. Uh, I got hit. I was at a demonstration one time doing video, you know, and I wasn't paying attention to the soldiers. I thought they were going to leave me alone because I was obviously a journalist. And so the guy hit me with a rubber bullet right in the lower calf on the bone. It hit right on the bone. You know, I was stationary and he aimed for the bone. And he figured, you know, it would break the bone. And what it did is it blasted, you know, a hole the size of that rubber bullet through the skin right down to the bone, you know. And so I didn't even feel that at first, you know, because there was no nerve there, you know. So I'm going back to the demonstration, you know, like, and I knew I was hit, you know, I felt a tremor and I have it on video, But you know, like it was, you know, a friend, you know, who asked to look at it, you know, and we discovered this hole. So I went to the ambulance.
It was like, yeah, I was walking back and I just found this hole in my leg.
Yeah,
Portable ashtray.
yeah. So I mean, like, you know, like each soldier that shoots like that is ordered to do so by an officer who's standing up and looking, you know, and decides what to do.
They look for press people. I mean,
Yeah.
even with the real bullets, when they're shooting protesters at the the peace festival that Palestine does every year, the coming back.
Right of
I
Return
can't remember.
Festival.
That's it. That's it. The bear return.
It's
Um,
today is the International Day of Commemoration for Palestine, United Nations International Day, November 29th, because of the partition resolution that was passed on this day by the General Assembly.
my love and solidarity to the people in Palestine, people in Lebanon, and the people of the dispersed Palestinian people that are millions strong.
I have confidence in Palestinian people, you know, like I think that they have the will, determination, and the intellect, you know, to be able to succeed. And the Zionists, you know, are just caught in a whirlpool that will go down the drain. You know, they'll have to wake up and realize that they're living, you know, as neighbors, and that no wall will separate you, no matter how high.
I mean,
This wall, I was thinking, you know, how ridiculous it is, you know, like, because I was looking at, you know, an image from space of the Earth, you know, on the cover of my book on the Federation. And, you know, the whole Eastern Hemisphere is the third world, right? And the other half of the globe is, you know, basically the first world and its colonies, you know, in South America. So if a wall is, you know, like what's necessary to separate, you know, the good from the bad, why not build a wall all the way around the Earth that separates, you know, the Eastern Hemisphere from the Western Hemisphere and be done with them, you know, like tell them to get lost.
I feel the dynamic has shifted more back to the old North and South again. I feel that's an issue we're having now because it seems more like it's South America, Africa, and South Asia that's been oppressed by America, Canada, the UK, France, Germany, Russia, and China. Because Russia and China are playing to be big players now.
Yeah, and that breaks it down. Yeah, that breaks it down better.
But no, but like absolutely to what you're saying though, like the North is just bastardized the world for centuries because what communism has done is it did bring greatness to the East, but I think a lot of people have forgotten that the East has a big history of Romanism itself. I mean, during the era of Jesus Christ, China was in a weird settler colonial situation of warlord, mischievry, and Romanistic developments, and they actually based their empire that come what's I don't know whether they based it off the Byzantine Empire or specifically the Roman Empire, but confusion. But their empire that they built after the Roman collapse. I'm not very good on dates.
Yeah, I'm not into history. I'm into political theory myself, but China was also an industrial power at one point before the British occupation. You know, that's why China is called China, you know, for dishes.
Yeah.
It was originally, you know, made in China. And then it was taken away by Britain.
Yeah, a lot of people forget about what Britain did to China. Like they and what's it? I would argue that's why we've seen a lot of British antics with the rise of Chinese imperialism because like think about their workshop of the world method. That was the exact way that Britain got to an imperial state, and that was also the same way that America got to an imperial state. America did it very mischievously because they supported the Nazis both east and west so that they could destroy Europe and then become their sugar daddy for military equipment.
Who did that? Who did that? I didn't follow that.
The USA.
Oh, well, the U.S. had economic relations with Nazi Germany, you know, right until the end. Yeah, they, you know, even paid compensation for having bombed a Ford factory. At
Yeah, then Ford won the fucking lawsuit.
Yeah. All right. Long live private property, right?
Fucking
Yeah.
hell, yeah. That's the way it is with these people. They quite literally worship it like it is the Lord above them. But if they're to read anything that Jesus Christ ever said, considering that they mention him every 5 seconds and seem to draw him like a European, even though he never went to Europe. What's it? Never touched foot on the ground in Europe. Jesus Christ, everything he's ever said, has never supported capitalism and could never support capitalism. And if they really think that their hoxy-poxy plastic version of Christianity that has no content to it is going to keep all these people they've got under control, they need to remember one thing that I've always loved from Bob Marley's song, Get Up, Stand Up. You can fool some people sometimes, but you can't fool all the people all the time.
I was thinking of a remark you made just previous to that. That is, like I think what's appreciated by many people in the life of Jesus Christ, whose name, like I figured out as Yehoshua ben Yusuf, is that he, like spoke in a prophetic tradition. In the Judaism, there's this thing called prophetic tradition, in which prophets, otherwise known as rebels, speak out against the prevailing authority to criticize it publicly. This is called the prophetic tradition. It's very political. So this is like what was picked up like
Very
by
dialectical.
Yeah. So this is the Jesus thing, like it fits into all of that, so that's why I think there's some veracity and validity to it, so rather than sort of playing with the historical record to see what proves what. But the same thing, like with the presence, of the ancient Israelites. I mean, it's like I I can't, like accept, that so many people in solidarity with the Palestinians are trying to justify their solidarity by arguing that the Jewish people never had any connection, with the ancient land in the Canaan, with the kingdoms of David and Solomon. And one could talk about how they're exaggerated and all that, and how they weren't even nation states; they were multinational societies. Especially in the case of Solomon. In any case, both of them come, from a Moabite, grandmother. So, like, what are they trying to build out of nothing? It's all fake.
I mean, they never stopped having that connection. What about the tribe of Joseph? They never left. Actually, Israel is crushing them now.
The tribe of Joseph in Ethiopia, what do you mean?
The tribe of Joseph still exists within Israel. I remember Ned talking to me about it. I can't remember the.
You mean the Samaritans? The Samaritans, they didn't consider themselves part of the kingdom of Israel. They were in Samaria. They lived in the north. They were in a different. They didn't accept the authority of a king.
But
and
they
so
still. But I would still say that that's still the Jewish connection to the land, easily proven. Like anyone that wants to try and disclose it, well, the Jews never left Syria.
Yeah, and they transformed into Christian Palestinians and Muslim Palestinians and such, as well.
Yeah, it's a united land of the Abrahamic faith. That's the way I always say it. It's like it's transformed into this sort of beautiful bastion of what everyone agrees on is God within the Abrahamic faith. Everyone agrees on the same God. I mean, it's just a delineation.
That's where there's a problem. That's where there's a problem, because the Christian religion, church, not religion, but the Christian church, has developed a doctrine which is contrary to Judaism and contrary to Islam. And that's one of the ideological motivations for the crusade.
I'd say that this is one of the developments of Romanism and how it changed Western Christianity into a power, because this is where the East and Western divide does come into what you were talking about earlier with Christianity. Orthodox, well, not just Orthodox, the Byzantium order of Christianity, and I would very much like to look at the Assyrian side of Orthodoxy as a very good example, but also Ethiopian Orthodoxy. These people are very true to Christians and they interact very well with Islam. What I would argue is that the way to solve this issue is not only does there need to be a reunification of the church into one church again, but it needs to be on the basis that Romanism is being smacked out for Greco-Romanic Christianity because it is much more attuned to the natural order of Christianity.
Roman religion is entirely different from Christianity. That was developed by the dynasty. I saw a documentary on this, a dynasty of Roman emperors from the family called the Flavian dynasty. And they developed, they rewrote, the Gospels, to fit into their own narrative and to justify their own rule. And they inserted stuff, like being subservient to authority and all that sort of stuff. So they constructed a religious justification, for their empire in that way. But that didn't include the business.
This is where you also see the conflict between the Celts and the Saxons as well, because the Saxons wanted to adopt this Romanistic Catholicism, where it's been revised, and the Celts were not up for that. I mean, if you looked at any divisive land within the Celtic regions, pretty much every name translates to land of the common people. They wanted a society for everyone, and that's why you have like a rise of King Arthur. Now, I have had King Arthur described to me as not a king, but kind of a king. So that means that he's more of a traditional king. He's a kingsman in the sense that he is a leader of his people as by just natural order, which, it begs to show a society.
Yeah, no, I have some references in my doctoral thesis about that in the early societies in which the ruler was entered into a pact, with civil society, and it said stuff, like that the king has to swear an oath, that he will serve the interests of the civil society, and if he doesn't continue to do so, then civil society has a right to revoke him from being the king, and it's an oath, and then that's
it's not democracy. It's democracy. They can't call it anything else. These people don't understand how much humanity has wanted to be democratic, but the Greeks and the Romans, calling themselves democracies, have done nothing but torment these people.
Yeah, it's democracy for the aristocrats. That's what it is. That's why it's called the Senate. It's the Senate. Like the United States is called the Senate too. Like everywhere, it's called the Senate. Why? Because that's what they call it in Rome.
We changed it up and called it Parliament. You could make a sitcom called The Aristocrats.
Yeah, that comes from the English common law revolution, with the levelers and all that.
Oh yeah, when we tried to make a republic and failed.
Winstanley. I've read a lot of Winstanley. Like it's sort of archaic, and written in sort of a theocratic language, but it's still sort of interesting, how it presents concepts.
I support the breakup of Britain, but I do have the 1800s draw up for the Republican flag as my desktop screen. Unfortunately, Hungary now has the same flag, so we don't think we can use that one.
Oh, wow. Okay. I guess we've gone on too long for people to continue listening to us, but I think that we've touched a lot of things that are important. So let's do it again, okay?
Oh yeah, this would be a great discussion to continue on.
Okay. So good evening to you.
And good evening to you as well, my friend. And it's been great speaking with you, and I hope everyone enjoys this video.
Yes.